At the risk of sounding obvious, video games require progression of some sort. It's part of the DNA and certainly one of the main reasons why a game might be played for a long time. It's required to help a player keep their interest, and in most cases is even the primary reason to play the game. Progression helps a player to understand the game and what they're doing in it, and also provides a reward for accomplishing goals. It feels uncontroversial to say a player needs to feel that they are progressing in any good game. This video is about progression, specifically how many multiplayer games no longer provide progression, or worse, they gate that progression behind additional paywalls. But before we can explore that, we need to lay the foundation and understand what progression really means. Single-player games have a few very specific types of progression. Easily the most obvious and most common would be story, the plot, the events and actions you take or that are taken in the world around your character. Your motivation is to get to the end of the story. Story as a source of progression has one major flaw, however. It ends. You watch the cutscenes, you follow the arrow, and then the story ends, and you stop playing. To combat this, games have added in repetitive content to slow and delay your story progression. And interestingly enough, this repetitive content becomes its own kind of progression. The playtime is padded, extra fluff is added to keep you busy, to keep you away from the story, or to provide additional reasons to play after completing the story. Collect the coins, collect the orbs, do mini games. Sometimes they're less active delays, but delays nonetheless. In Assassin's Creed, for example, they throw you into such an interesting world with an engaging story, but whether walking around in random modern buildings in Abstergo, on trailing missions, or collecting a million types of useless collectibles, their solution to making the game longer is by slowing you down. Your progress is slowed to make it feel like there's more progression to be had. However, even with this type of added progress, you can run out of things to do. Worse still, these things can be very boring and repetitive. And you might look back on your time with the game and view the added progression as the worst part. Collectathons can get boring. Mindless easy tasks get boring. Repetitive short loops of gameplay get boring without that constant feeling of progression. And you don't really feel like you're progressing without a reward. With this in mind, games started to add in dedicated progression systems. Whether by leveling up, gaining new power or equipment, or unlocking new areas, every moment you play, you feel like you accomplished something. If there's a high enough reward, the most satisfying moment can be finally gaining the reward at the top of the progression system. Start a new Minecraft world, and you know what to do. Go get wood to get stone, stone to get iron, iron to get diamond. Even if you don't like mining, you go down there because you know it's necessary for progression. Diamonds aren't just valuable because they're rare, they're valuable because they're previously the strongest material in the game. The reward for mining feels worth all the mining. Or any looter shooter, Borderlands, Destiny, Division, you find a shiny new gun at a slightly higher color grade and continue to level up, earning access to new shiny guns at slightly higher color grades. Or you get just enough gold to finally purchase that much stronger sword, that almost overpowered chest piece, and now you can breeze through the areas that previously gave you so much trouble. Once you have full diamond armor, though, finding more diamonds becomes less exciting. You don't even stop to mine coal anymore when you used to be excited to find it. You don't pick up the shiny new gun because, well, it can't be that much better than your current one, and besides, it's like way over there. You're not walking that far for junk. And let's be honest, you just pick up items to see your gold count go up. You don't even check to see if the numbers are slightly higher anymore. So maybe you jump into the multiplayer. In multiplayer, you don't have story usually. No, instead you have personal knowledge and skill growth. You become better. You learn how to play better, or you get more map knowledge, or you learn the best ways to work as a group. And through that, you progress. Oftentimes, the developers will also take some of those single-player ideas and translate them into multiplayer progression systems. Prestige ranks, battle passes, microtransactions, achievement-based cosmetics, and more. Ways for you to look cool or feel cool, to get new weapons or new gear, or brightly colored costumes. Overwatch is the apex of what I call the loot box implementation of progression. It was implemented so well that it's nearly impossible to criticize them without being called to task for it. See, in a competitive game where the only progression can really be your own personal growth, you can accentuate that sense of progression through cosmetics. Instead of unlocking things as you level up, you get a loot box. This can unlock anything from skins to sprays to emotes. You might get the same feeling finally opening a box to see a legendary skin as you would unlocking a great reward in a conventional progression system, but with one major difference. Blizzard also sells these loot boxes. The problem with selling progression is that suddenly that progression cannot affect the gameplay. If it does, you become pay to win, a dirty word in anyone's vocabulary. Overwatch gets away with this shift from traditional progression towards cosmetics because it's actually to their advantage. They are a competitive game. Taking away focus from unlocks to cosmetics allows for a player to instead focus on their rank, on their personal skills, their score, and to accentuate that progression with these cosmetic items that don't affect how you play, but still give you a sense of superiority, of having progressed in some way. It's hard to measure when you get better at a game, and often the times between rank ups in a competitive ladder are pretty long. Getting a shiny bauble lets you see improvement, even if it's ultimately fake. This type of fake progression doesn't hurt anyone because there is a core gameplay loop that is strongly based around personal improvement. Once again, you get better. This monetization also works in other competitive games like League of Legends, CSGO, or Rocket League, where in-game advantages would throw off the esports competitive viability. However, many games recently have decided to parrot this in games that are not competitively viable, to their detriment. You've probably heard of games as a service. It's something of a boogeyman in the industry. People who don't like it call it bring your own fun, and people who are selling it to you call it a living world. But almost nobody outside of the guys on the quarterly earnings call will ever say games as a service. I assume it's just too clinical sounding, but you know these games. Every game has to have some sort of live service now, some sort of long-term plan. The problem with games as a service is that by nature, they demand that you drip feed content slowly over a long period of time. How often is it that you jump into a brand new game only to find out that they've got a roadmap stretching out potentially for years, and not all of the content is in the game yet? They'll be adding it weekly or monthly with small but steady updates. This is a necessary part of games as a service. Worse, because every piece of content needs to pull in players who stopped playing and keep players around longer, and the next piece of content needs to also pull in players who stopped playing and keep players playing longer. It means that almost none of the content can be truly excellent, and that is on purpose. It can't be excellent, or the future content looks lackluster. It has to be mostly okay. If a single piece of content is too good, they need to spread that out, or players will play through it and then leave, and the next content won't bring them back. The content can never really improve, and neither can the player anymore. You can't have your player getting stronger and stronger because eventually you would escalate yourself too far. Improvements, even slight improvements, means that the power gap between players who experience everything and the players who come back to try something out becomes too extreme. Additionally, improving those top players means you can't easily reuse older content, and the next update needs to provide even stronger, bigger, badder improvements. If you give improvements, you reach the ceiling much faster. But there's something even worse about the kind of non-progression inherent in these games. The first time I booted up Sea of Thieves and jumped into a game with friends, the intended goal was obvious. Buy a quest off of one of the factions, grab the treasure, and sell it for gold. I kept doing these missions and my gold kept going up, but I couldn't figure out why I was doing it. As I talked to NPC after NPC, going to shop after shop, I could only find surface-level cosmetic items. I was totally confused, none of them gave any advantage in any way, so I kept saving my money, waiting for something to buy. It was partway through this that I realized there was no actual point to this game. The sails you can buy don't make your ship go any faster, the rarer capstans don't raise the anchor any quicker, the cooler cannons don't do any more damage, the higher level fishing rods don't catch fish any quicker, the better telescopes don't make you see further. Why? Why is it that this game doesn't implement any standard progression system? Why doesn't it give an actual purpose to buying items and unlocking things? This isn't a competitive game. As it is, even if you don't happen to care about cosmetics, once you get the one set you want, you're done, unless you feel like collecting them all and never using them. Since Sea of Thieves is a multiplayer game, the industry says that these items have to be cosmetic, or the game will be branded the dreaded pay-to-win and avoided like the plague. But since they have to implement a microtransaction system, they have to squeeze as much money as possible out of their player base, there was only one solution. Gut any and all interesting content, remove any concept of upgrades in a game that is seemingly built for it. If they want to sell you an item, it can't give you a competitive edge in a multiplayer game. But since Sea of Thieves doesn't play as a competitive multiplayer game, since it feels more like a single-player or co-op game, it feels dull. Something is missing. The game does try to add progression, but there's still no sense of reward because there's no value to these cosmetics. You're not improving your personal skill because it's not a competitive game. Instead, it tries to trick you into thinking you're progressing by having ranks within each faction. And as you do certain types of quests and sell the loot to a faction, you rank up within that faction. But all you unlock as you progress is a slightly fancier looking shovel, a shinier telescope, a red fishing rod. Anyone who doesn't care about cosmetics, anyone who doesn't care about 100%ing their filler achievements, anyone who is grasping for something, anything useful or fun, any reason to keep playing beyond just number on screen go up, will find this game confusing and frustratingly empty. In fact, 30 hours into the game, and I have nothing I didn't start the game with in the first minute. Do you see the problem? This non-competitive game tried to follow in the footsteps of competitive gaming and avoid having pay-to-win functionality in a game that has no other gameplay. Frankly, having upgrades and improvements to your ship would be the only real reason to play, but you can't have that. It's a game as a service, so you can't have improvement. It's a multiplayer game, so you can't have things that affect gameplay, and this just neuters the experience. But I'm not here to talk about how Sea of Thieves is an empty game with no reason to play it. I've said that before. No, instead, I'd like to make a suggestion on how to improve it. There's 3 things we have to address. First, the player needs to feel a sense of progression. Second, the company needs to be able to monetize and produce profit, or they just won't do anything. Third, it needs to be fair to players. Nothing too manipulative, no Skinner boxes or predatory practices. And I think we already have the right implementation, but it's only being used in the wrong types of games. The Battle Pass. Now hear me out because I already know that someone is going to tell me how these are awful, but let me make this argument. A Battle Pass provides a tangible and visible sense of progression to the gamer. They can see as they make improvements. It's highly democratized as well. Everyone who buys the Battle Pass can get the same things out of it. The only limiting factor is how long you play for. Some games give you insanely long seasons to get these passes, and therefore, if you play reasonably frequently, you can almost certainly get everything. Secondly, they do produce new revenue, and it's easy and consistent. You spend your time working on a really good Battle Pass or Season Pass or whatever, and then when it's ready, people buy it. Or they don't, and that's fine too. They're making a choice. Third, though, and I think this is the part that is most interesting to me, it shifts the philosophy of monetization away from trying to squeeze every dollar out of a few select whales, and instead turns that focus towards providing a high-quality experience that the maximal amount of players will choose to indulge in. That's a much less predatory, much less scummy mentality for a developer to have. To say, look, I make money because I provide a service that many, many people want to experience is way less awful than I indulge in psychological trickery to convince a few people to remortgage their homes. At least I think so. The feeling of constant improvement, whether through story, unlock, skill, or rank, is essential to the long-term health of a game. With no reason to keep going, a player can very easily lose interest. Unfortunately, attempts to monetize the player base can put microtransactions in direct odds with the game's progression. When the goal of a progression system switches from keeping a player entertained to taking a player's money, it places inherent restrictions on the type of progression allowed. When players can outright buy items or pay for a chance to unlock an item, it limits the type of items that can be attained. The feeling of truly earning something disappears when anyone can buy it outright or randomly attain it in a loot box. Games should reward skill, and sidestepping or discouraging it changes the overall feeling of a game and changes the value of the items in question. While obviously it'd be better to just have this content freely available for a full-price game, many companies are refusing to do so. As long as there are businessmen in suits owning these companies and players willing to pay for it, this will always be a part of gaming. So if they have to charge you, by far the least scummy way to go about it is a battle pass system. This type of microtransaction doesn't net a select few whalers thousands of dollars in debt, nor does it prey upon those predisposed to gambling addiction. It rewards the players who actually sink their time into the game. It rewards the players who stick around long term. It brings back the feeling of true progression, skins to earn, challenges to do, reasons to play that have been sorely lacking in games as a service or loot box driven economies. And with this system, if a developer does something anti-consumer, they immediately pay for it. So that's my argument. Microtransactions ruin progression in non-competitive multiplayer games. And that's my solution as well. What about you? Do you have a solution? Do you even think there needs to be one? I'd love to know more, and maybe even if you can think of a single game that doesn't have any sort of progression at all. I sort of want to say that maybe those dress-up games that have no unlocks of any sort, maybe that's a game that doesn't have any sense of progression at all. Let me know what you think in the comments. This script was co-written by Ryan Dopp, and he makes meme videos about SpongeBob. There's going to be a video in the end card, and you should leave a comment on his video telling him that you prefer Chip and Dale. He desperately needs to agree with me on this. Thank you so much for sharing this video. It really means a lot because it's the only way a small creator can grow on this platform. If you'd like to watch another video in the corner, you can do that right now. And as always, we'll see you on the next one.